Well, good day. My guest today is the 22-year-old Ashlin Winckler. Ashlin has just completed a BA degree in film and television production. She also holds a diploma in musical theatre. That was done here in Cape Town, where I am at the moment, but Ashlin is speaking to us from Utrecht in the Netherlands because she is studying a second BA at the moment in animation. There is a lovely link that I will put in this interview to an animation project that she has just completed. But I'm here to ask her questions about how it is to emigrate from South Africa to the Netherlands. Ashlin, welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for allowing us to chat to you today.
Yeah, no problem at all. Glad to be here.
Great. So the question is, here you are, 22 years old, you've just basically uprooted yourself from Cape Town, where you've been your entire life, I guess, and now you're in Utrecht. How is that?
Well, we moved like right in the middle where Netherlands was still kind of in lockdown. So like the first couple months being here, I couldn't really go out and do anything. We've been here for a couple Christmases to get used to the area, but I couldn't really go out and like kind of really get linked into like the community or whatever, or like society in a sense, because you had to stay at home. There's nothing you could do. No restaurants were open, and I wouldn't be starting school until September. So that was like 9 months of free time for me that I hadn't had in ages, because I went straight into university after high school. So it was a little bit of a kind of also just getting used to being a full family in the house again, because we got so used to being separate for like a whole year during the first thing of COVID. So yeah, so it took a little while. Like now that I've been going to school and using the public transport more, I feel a little bit more rooted, I guess.
Rooted. I like that. I mean, the point is that, okay, so COVID was an absolute bummer, and part of what you had to get used to is you guys lived in a huge house here in Cape Town. That the house where you are now, I mean, many of your family members describe it as tiny. So there obviously there obviously are many differences, and then just briefly, I mean, I guess you don't really speak Dutch yet. I know that you are learning the language, but you have grown up in South Africa as an English-speaking South African. How is that, not being able to speak the language? You address it in your video as well, and that's one of the reasons why I'm keen to hear your view, not just the narrator's view.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is weird, because we literally have family that descend from Netherlands, something I only learned recently. So the fact that like we've kind of like come full circle, but I literally cannot speak Dutch at all, because I just completely grew up English. My mom and dad are fluent in Afrikaans, but they never spoke it at home. So my sister and I only speak English. The most Afrikaans I know is from high school, and I haven't spoken that because I've been doing my B as well back in Cape Town. So like kind of like having to rewire my brain now while doing Dutch lessons, because there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences in Afrikaans and Dutch. So kind of getting used to that is still a little bit of a process, but I'm getting better at like speaking basic things like at restaurants or at shops. Like I can kind of respond with what they are asking or whatever. So it's very slow going, but I am getting there. But,
and then your studies, you are now studying, you're basically essentially doing a second BA in animation. Yeah. I'm keen to speak about that, but your studies obviously are in English.
Yes, that was one of the reasons I chose to study there at Willem de Kooning, is because they're one of the few animation programs that were taught in English. Okay. There is one that's here in Utrecht, but that's taught in Dutch, and I obviously can't do that.
Yeah, that
so, would have been but I'm really happy with where I am now. It's a really amazing university.
Fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, I mean that's so cool. And just if I may ask, I mean, you know, the BA that you did here in Cape Town, it is highly regarded obviously I know of it, and a lot of people are very positive about it. But how do you find that? Is there a different culture? Is studying different I mean, I guess you had a bit of a bummer with COVID in Cape Town as well. So I mean, it's kind of, I realize that to ask you this question is a little bit daunting, because somehow actually I don't know whether you know what it really is like to study in South Africa. Well, you may have just before COVID, and now suddenly this is what. But do please just tell us, from a perspective of a young adult, now studying a second BA, is it very different? Is it very similar, or is it just it's the same?
It's very different, because even though my BA in film and television had a practical side, there was a lot of theory as well. So lots of tests and essays and that kind of stuff. Whereas at Willem de Kooning, it's very practical based. So I literally only wrote one exam now in December for animation theory. Everything else, like practical, like everything surrounded that project, which you linked now in this thing. So this was a December project. So all of our subjects like work together towards helping us build that project. And so they mark us off that project. So it's a very different marking system. It's a difference in what kind of work they expect us to do. Also, they're very much more on top of things, much more online based. They just feel a little bit more organized, I guess. That's a good way of explaining it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I kind of joke with my friends, like Willem de Kooning is kind of like what I thought City Varsity was going to be like, but it actually is, because Willem de Kooning, they really say, we have all these stations for sewing and clay and this and that, film, television, like photography, all these things. They have all these different stations, and they literally say, go explore, go take classes in this and that. They really want you to expand your artistic mediums that you use. So I think it's a really great, and it's just, it's a really much bigger space. It's definitely more organized, and it's got a lot more resources. I think that's definitely something as well. If I look at like the film equipment that they have there versus our film equipment gear room, I remember City Varsity, a lot of the gear was like always broken half the time. Most of the time if you wanted like really specialized gear, you had to rent outside of school. Whereas here at Willem de Kooning, it just looks a lot more kept up to date and looked after well, I guess. But yeah, so resources, I think, is the main difference.
Okay, and it's okay, and resources, obviously, that's one thing that you do talk about that in your movie as well, the whole issue of resources, and it obviously is in many ways a rich country, and yet not everybody is flashy rich. Am I correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't seen anyone that's like super rich. I don't know how even you would explain it. It's like, I consider like our house like really nice. Like it's a 2-story house. It's in a really nice neighborhood. It's like a young neighborhood where there's a lot of little kids and everything. So the school is a really lovely park here. Like it's a really safe spot. So even though we lived in like a golf estate back in Cape Town, and that was like the safest it could be, this feels super safe, but it's just a normal neighborhood. Like I don't have to be in a gated community to feel safe, which is great. I can walk around with my headphones on. That's like something you can't do in Cape Town, but I can do here. So it's like little things like that. That's a bit of a difference. So, yeah.
And you commute by train basically to your classes, am I correct?
Okay, so yeah, public transport I think is a lot more up to standard here. They definitely maintain it a lot better because more people really depend on it. It needs to be working constantly. So, and the apps are always up to date. If the train is not working or something, you get an alert immediately, and you can get rerouted and everything like that. So yeah, because I take the commutes an hour there, an hour back every day. So versus like when I had to take the My City bus into Cape Town, definitely a lot more efficient, a lot more on time. There's never really any strikes that I know of. So yeah, it's definitely more efficient.
There will be strikes. You will actually. I mean, the Netherlands. anyway, but that you will experience that. Cost wise, if you experience, I mean, if you were to say to me, what is more expensive going from school to home, etc., on my city, or using the public transport now, what is better in terms of costing, price wise?
Costing is definitely cheaper in Cape Town.
Okay.
With the bus. I don't know if it's because for me it's pretty much traveling between cities, because I'm going from Utrecht to Rotterdam every day. So it is a bit expensive. But because of my visa, it's a reunification visa, so I have to live at home under the same address as my family. And also at the moment, finding housing here is very difficult for people. A lot of my friends from school, like they were struggling, even like in the first couple of weeks into school, people were struggling to find housing. So to try find a place in Rotterdam, would be very expensive as well. So for now, it's the only option I really have, to take the train every day. But yeah, it is more expensive.
Are you keen to maybe elucidate on that? Because I do know that that is something that I know of the Netherlands, is that many young people your age are actually, like you are now, living with their parents simply because there are no housing available, or there is no housing available for people your age. It's kind of common knowledge. Am I correct, or am I? Say again?
It's a really bad problem at the moment. Yeah. Like a lot of like, there was this one guy, he was saying, like, I'm at a hostel, but I need to leave. I have to leave soon and I don't have a place. Like, he was on constant different groups trying to find any kind of space. People who, like, some of my classmates have told me, like, the spaces that they're staying in are tiny, like cupboard space worth of space. And it's just like, it's scary to think that, especially because a lot of them are like completely out of country, like they're coming from Portugal, they're coming from Russia, they're coming from Poland, and to try find a space here in a country where you don't speak the language and you're by yourself. At least I'm lucky that I can kind of be with my family, but other people don't have that privilege. So yeah, it's not the best situation at the moment for people.
Now, but having said that, now I don't want to dwell on the negative, but it is something that somebody who wants to go to, for instance, who wants to do animation at Rotterdam University, it is something that people would need to take into consideration. I mean, we are lucky in South Africa. I mean, we've got this incredible, we've got so much space, and accommodation is relatively cheap. Am I correct, if you compare it to the Netherlands?
Yeah, we did. I had an apartment in Cape Town to be closer to university, just because, again, drive, bus, all that kind of stuff. And it was obviously a lot easier to find a space, and it was cheaper in Cape Town than it would be if I had to go try rent a space like maybe half that size in Rotterdam. Probably it would be, I'm really guesstimating here, I'm not good with numbers, but it definitely would have been easier in Cape Town probably to find a space. Yeah.
Having said that, do you enjoy it there or not?
Oh no, I love being here, just because you feel safer, and also, like I said, things are a lot more efficient. It is a bit more expensive, so obviously that's something that you have to kind of get used to, is like not having as much money to do as much things with. Like, we as a family, we used to go out a lot to dinners in Cape Town. In Netherlands, we can't really do, like, it has to be a real treat if you want to get a takeaway from somewhere, or if you want to go out for a dinner. Like, you really need to make it like a treat, because it's quite expensive. But I feel like that's like a small price to pay to being somewhere where things are a lot more efficient and things are safer to walk around in, especially as a woman. So yeah.
Do you see yourself living in the Netherlands or Europe long term?
Definitely, 100%. I love Cape Town. I mean, I lived there 22 years. There's a lot of beautiful pieces to it, but there's also a lot of terrible pieces to it as well. The corruption, the society, the negativity there, mostly just the safety thing as well. And I think also for me to want to try find a job in an entertainment industry like animation, I think it'll be a lot easier here in Netherlands and in Europe than if I had to try to do it in South Africa. Because South Africa,
there's triggerfish down here in Cape Town.
true. But I mean, you know, other film things come to South Africa to film because it's cheaper there and they get cheaper labor.
Quite. Yes.
Yeah, so that's just like a fact versus Europe, where it's art and culture and things are just a train ride away. We could go to Venice or Paris or whatever for like a weekend, you know, we can drive up to Belgium in the car. So obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to do that yet, but like once that's all kind of settled, like it's going to be a really awesome experience to be able to really branch out culturally and like see these different countries for myself. So.
I do want to ask you a question. I know a lot of Dutch people, because you are in hard lockdown at the moment, a lot of Dutch people actually now zip across the Belgian border to go and just have some freedom.
They're literally, like people are asking them to stop because like everyone was going to Belgium to watch like the new Spider-Man movie that came out because the cinemas were open there, and then the cinemas had to be temporarily closed there, and now they're open again. So it's like, so that's like a thing. It's not like you would go drive to Pretoria just to go watch a movie or whatever, or to Joburg. So it's definitely a different experience. But it sounds logical when you've lived here long enough, I think, maybe.
Now, I want to talk about your beautiful animation project, which, by the way, the link is in here. Just look, if you're on YouTube, there will be a link down below, or if you're on LitNet, the link will be very clearly visible. And I'm quite curious about the fact that you have chosen for your project, you've chosen colonization, colonialism, and in it you address racism. Let's just quickly talk about how do you, the Dutch, are they a lot more socially aware than in South Africa or not?
I think they're a lot less socially aware, to be honest, because for the project, we were all given 10 articles to choose from. And so a lot of other people...
Sorry, it's okay.
It's fine. So we were given 10 articles to choose from, and a lot of us chose the decolonization one. And that one was specifically related to an art museum that was renamed in Rotterdam, in Witte de Witstraat, which is the name of a man who was a colonizer who was he caused the deaths of a lot of people just to up the expenses of like a certain product from their home island or something along those lines. So I actually ended up stepping away from the whole art world and the Wit itself, and kind of really taking a personal route of how I've come from South Africa, where we're a lot more socially aware of apartheid, about our role in it, and how it's still affecting us now. Because I mean, it's been just over 20 years. It's not even been 50 years since apartheid was over. It was 5 years before I was born. That's so short. And people are still experiencing the aftermath of what the government did and how it's placed certain people of color, in areas and in places in society where they have less resources and they have less of everything, pretty much. And it was just weird for me coming from South Africa, where like I became really aware of all these things, and you're aware of race like all the time. It's like such a big part of society, versus Netherlands, where especially in Rotterdam, like they boast about how they're very, like a melting pot, like, oh, we accept all of these people from all these things. But like underneath, there's a lot of microaggressions that people don't even realize, and it's all linked back to colonialism. And for me specifically, I was thinking about it already because I was in a book club reading this amazing book called White Tears, Brown Scars, and listening to other people, especially people who either grew up in Netherlands, who are people of color, or people who are color from other places like in America and stuff like that. Like they were talking about their experiences here moving to Netherlands, and how people really sweep, like Netherlands schools, they really sweep their whole colonialist history under the rug. Like I asked my schoolmates who grew up, I was like, hey, what did you learn in history? Because obviously when we're in history, I think we learned about apartheid like 3 times at least throughout, like at a young age and middle age, and when I was taking history in high school. And that's when I learned it in like real detail. So to hear people say, oh yeah, it was maybe mentioned in one line that we colonized India, or that we did this, or they talk about how the VOC and the everything was looked at as a positive thing. And in museums, art museums as well, you know, all these paintings of people who were colonizers who benefited off slavery, you know, they were seen as these pinnacle of wealth and the golden age of the Renaissance of Netherlands. So that's why in one part in my movie, you have me scrolling on my phone and you see an old painting from the Dutch, and you see that there's this woman and she is the wife of a colonizer, and like she's got all these pearls, and that was a real sign of wealth. And then right below that is a Black woman, and it's a painting also from that time period, that people don't know that there were Black people here present in the Netherlands. Rembrandt himself lived in a Black Jewish neighborhood, and people don't know this because so much of it is kept under wraps. And it's only now people are kind of like, after the Black Lives Matter movement, people are kind of like, yeah, we've been here the whole time. Like, here's all these things that you don't even know that you're doing. And it's also like the most recent thing, like Zwarte Piet here, where it's also like a really, like people are being so finicky about it, like being like, oh, but you're gonna ruin this holiday for children if you take away this character, like it's a staple character. But people are literally performing blackface and they don't see the problem with it. And
just briefly, I know Zwarte Piet, but many South
for those
Africans
who don't.
Yeah, can you just briefly explain St. Nicholas and where Zwarte Piet then, you know, supposedly is supposed to come in, and then also why you think, you know, why you talk about blackface. So just explain that, because not every South African would understand the reference.
Yeah, no, I literally only learned about it like this year, the whole Zwarte Piet thing. I didn't even know. So Sinterklaas is a thing held on like the 5th of December or somewhere in November. And it's this whole idea of that, like Sinterklaas specifically leaves gift chocolates, like little things like that in your shoes. And it's like for things for the kids. And the thing is that Sinterklaas is supposed to have a helper called Zwarte Piet, who he apparently freed. And Zwarte Piet is obviously a Black man. And so now in all these plays at school and in festivals or parades, whatever, you have people, white people, it's like a history of white people putting on blackface and pretending to be Zwarte Piet. And, you know, a lot of people, like now after Black Lives Matter, people are like, oh, you can't do that. Like there's a problem with that. Like you're literally performing blackface, which is very problematic in so many ways. And people are now saying either we need to change the character so he's not Zwarte Piet, he's not Black, he just has soot on his face. But then why doesn't Sinterklaas have soot on his face? And other people are saying, oh, but you're taking away a beloved character, or like you're not letting the kids enjoy it fully. Like you can still have the character, but just don't do blackface. Like you just need to become aware of what's problematic and what's not, and just try fix those problems. So like you can still keep the whole, he can have a helper, but just don't perform the blackface.
If I can quickly say, Sinterklaas, natuurlijk, if you think Santa Claus, there's obviously, you know, we in South Africa, we have a very American way of doing Christmas. So Christmas to us is a big fat man going, ho, ho, ho. Normally a white man, funny enough, in South Africa. And of course, we still believe that there has to be snow somewhere on our Christmas cards in South Africa. Well, that's a different ball game. I'm going to ask you about snow at the moment. But it is interesting, though, that so Sinterklaas and Santa Claus, obviously you can understand where they come from, but the Dutch way of doing it, and even in Belgium, is very different from the American way of doing it, which we've become accustomed to. Am I correct?
No, definitely. Yeah. South Africa is so westernized and versus Netherlands.
Well,
like I was
Americanized, actually, isn't it?
Americanized, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so weird. Like I didn't understand it. Like I just thought it was Sinterklaas, Santa Claus, like I thought it was like the Dutch kind of thing, but apparently he comes from some other country. It's like a whole thing. I had a whole lesson about it in one of my Dutch classes, but I obviously can't remember everything now because it's not a holiday that I grew up with, so I'm not very familiar with all the details. But it's like a whole other thing on its own, and it was interesting to hear. So like I was like, oh, that's sweet. And like my mom got us like really nice mugs to open on Sinterklaas for fun. But then I like heard about it from other friends about the Zwarte Piet issue, and also while I was doing research for my own colonization animation, and I was like, that's problematic. That's an issue that definitely needs to be addressed, like a lot of other issues that need to be addressed. So even though I don't specifically talk about Zwarte Piet as like an example in my animation, you know, it definitely links back to that about how Netherlands, you know, they really want to say how progressive we are, how accepting we are of people of color, of immigrants, of queer people, and all those things, LGBTQ, sorry, if for those who don't know. But there's still a lot of issues going on around here that I'm still kind of, especially because I'm white, I obviously don't experience the issues that people of color who come from somewhere else. So if I was Black and from South Africa, I think I would be experiencing a lot of different things than I am as a white person. So that was also something I kind of needed to acknowledge in my own video, saying even though I'm coming here as an immigrant, I'm still not experiencing the worst experiences simply because I look Dutch. People immediately assume I'm Dutch. When I enter a shop or a cafe, they start speaking to me in Dutch because they think I'm going to be Dutch just because of my skin color. So versus like the person who heads my book club, Emily, she grew up here in the Netherlands. Her dad is Black, her mom is white. She grew up in a village where she and her dad were the only people of color. She speaks fluent Dutch. And yet, like, you know, immediately Dutch people assume that she's want to speak in English or not speak English at all when she's actually fluent. So it's just a really interesting kind of double standard thing going on here that is...
Hence the fact that you are saying perhaps you just don't want to see.
Exactly. Perhaps you don't want to see your problems because you don't want to acknowledge that there is actually a lot of change that still needs to happen, specifically within our own thoughts and our own considerations. It's all really, that book, White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad, it really opened my eyes a lot. And I try to really include like those ideas about how colonization and the stereotypes and the ideas that derive from it that all put people of color at a disadvantage, it still affects them today, and it still affects our thought processes today in modern society. And so, so unless we sit down with ourselves and say, okay, I think this and this because of colonization, not because it's true, but because it's what white people who wanted to maintain power decided to say. It's really figuring out where those problems are in your own thought processes before you can fix the overall problem of racism in society. Like, how can you promote that when you're not willing to first fix it within yourself?
Now, having said that, I mean, you know, the South African issue, and I think we still have a lot to learn in South Africa as well, despite everything like that. I'm going to ask a very broad question now. Is there something that you may be able to, if you were to come back to I hope you obviously are going to come and visit friends post-COVID, I hope, and coming back to South Africa, you know, over a cup of coffee, would there be experiences that you can bring back to and perhaps think differently when you're in South Africa about along these lines with friends or not? I mean, I'm you know, you now, because you now actually looking at the Netherlands with new eyes, but surely you must also look back at South Africa and think, gosh, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
The book also, it's been making me think a lot about like my past actions and thoughts and like why I thought these things were okay to say or okay to think. And it's made me realize like a few times, because again, I grew up very privileged as a white person. I got to go to a private school my whole life. They were more white Christian kids than anything else present. There were a few people of color in my class, but you know, like for instance, I asked one girl, Brittany, you know, why is your hair normal? And she's colored, so she didn't have the full afro. She had more just curly hair, and that's not a good thing to ask. And so it's like me now kind of thinking back to those moments and being like, oh, I thought that because of colonization, because of white supremacy, because of all these things that I was raised on, and apartheid especially, you know, also this whole idea of that white is the supreme race when it's not. And so it's definitely making me reconsider a lot of things in my life and a lot of past actions and thoughts, and like how I can be better moving forward and be more considerate and conscious moving forward. So I think maybe coming back to South Africa, I might like again have fresh eyes as well, because I don't know, I think I just might try to be better first and foremost. So yeah.
You mentioned that you were in a school with a lot of Christian kids, and that kind of opens a little rabbit hole for me now to address religion. Am I correct that the Dutch society is a lot more secularized, or do you find that it's very similar to liberal English society in Cape Town?
I think there's not as much of an emphasis on Christianity, and you know, like how, especially like growing up in Melkbos, where everyone is like very much, there's like 5 different churches there or something, and it's all Christian churches. And you know, so you get these people preaching, or like how I worked at an ice cream shop and you had this guy every talking about God and this and that and everything, and that's totally fine if you have that belief. But like I feel like it's not as much very visceral. It's not as much stuck down your throat here than it is in Cape Town, at least in my personal experience from where I've been around. There obviously still are churches around here and they're really beautiful, but like there's no like emphasis on this idea of that you need to be Christian to be a good person, or you need to be Christian to be considered, you know, someone to be acceptable or something like that. I don't think it's ever really been brought up once in conversation with anyone before, versus South Africa, where I think, you know, the whole apartheid Christianity thing still again is reigning there in certain areas and in certain societies, even though, you know, it's not the only religion, it's not the only way to live your life in a good way. So yeah.
You mentioned earlier also that you know the LBGTQI plus community is you know quite openly embraced there. Is it, and I'm going to ask a Nordic question now, but is it like racism where it's supposedly so, or is it truly so? How do you experience that?
Well, as a queer person myself, like for instance, my school is a really safe space. There's a lot of other openly queer people there, which is really great, versus City Varsity, where I think I was one of 2 people in my class who were queer. And I think, again, in Cape Town, if you're white and queer, it's a different experience than if you're a person of color and you're queer. Because if you had to come out as queer, say if you live in a township, that's going to put your life at risk. Versus here, where if you had to say it, I think less people are judgy about it. I think there's probably still people who think, oh, you know, all these negative thoughts or ideas, but it's not, for me personally, I haven't had any negative experiences so far. But again, I haven't, like, I've only really like started opening my circles now, which is at an art school where obviously a lot of people are very open and very open-minded, or my ballroom classes where my partner is thankfully a really cool guy who is really open-minded as well. So thankfully I've had very positive experiences as a queer person here, but I don't know if, I can't say for certain, you know, whether or not people, like if it's as bad or as good as Netherlands want you to believe. I just think it is probably still a problem that's also prevalent, but isn't spoken about as much, because again, Netherlands likes the idea of being this really progressive country. So yeah, that's the best I can give about that.
These are important questions. I mean, because it's also part of why I'm asking these questions is I'm also trying to look at the society where I live in Cape Town, which you know well. And I'm trying to see myself also being reflected in your eyes now, where you are different. I mean, you're a different generation, obviously, but also you're in a different space. And I'm trying to understand myself more by asking questions about you and how you experience that. If you were to, if somebody were to listen to this video as a young person, as a queer person, as somebody who wants to perhaps move out to Europe, specifically than the Netherlands, because that's what you have experience about. Are there specific things that they need to address, that they need to be aware of? It's not just a case of getting onto a plane and just arriving there and saying, yo, I'm going to be an immigrant. Could you perhaps talk about that?
I don't know really what much I can say. Because again, I've had the kind of the safety net of moving with my whole family, versus saying someone who, like many of my classmates who are now coming here living on their own, trying to figure things out. I think again, I've kind of just had the lucky, privileged kind of side of everything, living in a nice suburban neighborhood that's really safe. But yeah, I think just...
Let's talk mental. I mean, the reason why I'm asking this is actually your dad, Cora, was very good at explaining the entire legal system and why you came.
Yeah, I can't do that. I can't do that.
I'm interested in how you experience it. I'm talking about kind of a more mental. If you, it's one thing to actually say, I'm keen to go and, for instance, study in the Netherlands, and a lot of South Africans, and there are lots of people who would want to listen to this video and actually want to go over there. And let's say, for instance, that money is not an issue. So let's park that one, and they get a scholarship, they go over there. What's the first thing that you need to do? How do you prepare yourself? I mean, how would, if you were to look at Ashlin at 21 a year ago, what would you say to Ashlin 21 year ago? How would you tell yourself how to prepare?
Oh gosh.
Somebody like you, what would be important to know and to be aware of? What kind of clothes to pack? I mean, what kind of what kind of things to immediately be aware of if you step off the plane? That's the sort of thing that because that often makes it very hard for a South African to arrive in Europe if you've never, obviously there are South Africans who have traveled a lot and are quite au fait with it. But let's say somebody who hasn't actually.
Okay. Especially if you're coming in winter, pack in layers. I've bought so many more layers here now. Just getting used to the cold is one thing, especially because it snowed in the December last year when I first arrived with my mom to finally live here with the family in the house. But I think also if you are white, be prepared to be immediately assumed Dutch. And so you're going to have to learn to either say, spreken je Engels? Do you speak English? That's a phrase I use very often these days, especially over the phone. So be prepared to be assumed that you are Dutch if you're white. If you're a person of color coming from South Africa, I think be prepared maybe for people not being, a little bit microaggressive in the fact that they might be surprised that you speak very good English or something along those lines. Or they might make assumptions about you that unfortunately you will either have to be step back or you might have to correct them. Some people are very surprised when I say I'm from South Africa. They say, oh, I thought you were from London or England because of your accent, or other people are like, oh, but you're white. So be prepared to answer a lot of questions that maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think as you do it more, you kind of develop good answers to kind of answer those questions. Yeah, it's definitely, again, it's like kind of like leaving the mindset of, oh my gosh, I'm constantly in danger. Just because, especially walking around in Cape Town like every day for school, like I would just walk like 5 minutes from my car to my varsity, and that alone is like kind of like a thing where I have to just focus forward head. I can't speak to people on the street because if I say hello to someone, they're going to assume that I want to, I don't know. Versus here, where I haven't really experienced a lot of homelessness, a lot of people who are dangerous approaching me, or scammers or something along those lines. So it's kind of getting into the mindset of being like, okay, you can actually relax a little bit now. Um, I'm still always worried about being pickpocketed, but I think that's just a normal fear from that's something good to be aware of. But yeah, so it's taken me a while to kind of relax a little bit. And like I said, like for instance, it's such a simple thing, but being able to wear your headphones while you walk around the city, like it's such a small thing, but it's a really nice privilege to have. So it's kind of nice feeling safer. And yeah, and also, gosh, be prepared if you like having milk with your tea, be prepared for people to not understand that.
Koffie
I don't
verkeerd
order
en thee
tea.
verkeerd. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't order tea at cafes anymore because they bring you a huge glass of hot water with the tea bag on the side, and that's it. You have to ask, can I have the milk? Can I have some sugar? Otherwise, you're just gonna have to literally sit there dunking your. And also, their rooibos isn't real rooibos, and their other teas. I'm a huge. I only drink rooibos, so we order proper rooibos from a supplier because you don't get it here. So yeah, that's a few of the things I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah.
Do you cycle a lot?
I cycle a lot more here than I used to, and also getting used to going on the other side of the road because they drive on the right side of the road and not the left. So figuring that out with the bike lanes takes a bit of time. First start off, like especially if you're living in the city, just like start off with small routes at first and kind of like start branching out, because in the city it's obviously a lot more busy, especially in Rotterdam, because we literally had like orientation week and they had us on one day on the bikes and we were all following each other in the city, and it's quite a daunting thing. I'm used to now like riding to the park or to the shops or everything in my bike. It feels very Dutch when you're riding your bike to go to the shops. I feel like the most Dutch whenever I'm doing that. So it does take a little bit of time just to kind of get used to the different side of the road and also the different road rules as well, because people actually obey the road rules here, which is really nice. So jaywalking is not a thing. Don't jaywalk. Just wait for the robot and check for all the lanes,
Do you
because you have
actually
to
wait
check.
for the robot there?
Yes, you have to. You can't, like you have to, because otherwise you're going to get run over by a car, because they're not going to stop for you. They expect you to wait, and we expect them to wait, and they actually do, which is really nice. It's something my dad always says he's always so worried about, because like sometimes he'll stop when he's not supposed to, but he's still scared that the people aren't going to stop, but then they do, and then they get mad at him because he stopped as well. So it's like, but I mean, if you grew up in Cape Town where like no one, where you got all the taxis and the taxi ranks and those big white cars that are driving on the sidewalk to get past you, it's quite a big jump as well. I haven't learned to drive here this side yet, so that's going to be a whole other experience as well. Eventually, when I do get the chance to learn that. So yeah, so take your time getting used to the routes and the road rules and everything.
But let's briefly rules. Let's just, maybe we should. This is a good spot to end. Is it true that overall the Dutch are a lot more obedient, or not?
I think they are. I think, yeah, I don't know. They're also very blunt people.
Okay. Okay.
They really are very straightforward people. But yeah, I think they are definitely more obedient with the laws. Like they're very specific. It's very specific with the traffic laws, with the littering, with also their recycling and everything, like that's a whole other ball game. There's like a whole dump site where you literally have to dump like your polystyrene in one place, your wood in one place, your this and that. It's like they're very organized in that sense, and obviously they expect you to follow those rules. So it's kind of getting used to being more organized, I guess. So yeah, they do follow their rules, but I mean, it makes it very efficient. So yeah, so they're definitely more efficient this side with that kind of stuff, I think. So
And do you
that's
find
also
that,
maybe something to get used to.
do you
Yeah,
find
so
that a positive or a negative?
I think it's a positive,
Okay.
because if I look at like areas that I live in, how there's definitely not as much litter in cities as there is in like Cape Town. There doesn't seem to be as many accidents. There just seems to be a lot more, everything's kind of running more smoothly, I guess. So that's good. So I think it's a good thing. Maybe some people might find it irritating, but I think you get used to it. So yeah.
Ashlin, thank you so much. And thank you for also for allowing us to use that lovely animation project of yours in the interview.
No
Once
problem.
again, just either look, if you're on YouTube, just look below. There will be a link to the LitNet site, or there, you know, on LitNet, there will, you know, it will be clearly visible just underneath the video. And good luck. And thank you for taking time to chat to us so that we can actually learn from your experience about going to the Netherlands and experiencing it there.
Yeah, no problem. I hope that helps someone in the long run, maybe. Yeah, otherwise, yeah, thanks for also promoting the video. That helps a lot as well. So I hope more people will learn from it. So,
do let us know if there are more projects, and perhaps we can, I mean it, in future we can talk about, you know, other projects and see what we can do. I'm always keen
awesome.
to, you know, experience interesting literary and artwork and everything like that. Thank you.
Cool.
And go well.
Thank you. Thank you, you too. Bye.